It was the knock that shattered my calm. After 15 years of silence, they showed up. My mother, the woman who threw me out. At 16, and her new husband. They weren't here to apologize. They were here for one thing: money. But they didn't know what they were walking into. How could they? They didn't know who I had become. And that moment, when they asked for help, changed everything. I'm Rachel Monroe, 33 years old. I live in a cozy apartment tucked away on the quiet side of Minneapolis, where I've carved out a life I'm proud of. I'm in upper management at a logistics firm, one of those jobs that demands not just long hours, but real grit. It's the kind of work that calls for resilience and a focus that only those who've been tested by fire can truly understand. I didn't inherit my success. There's no trust fund here, no safety net to catch me when I fall. My journey has been about proving everyone wrong, the people who doubted me, who wrote me off when I was just a kid. When I think about where I am now, I know it's all been built from the ground up, layer by layer, through the pain and persistence. But when I think back to my family, well, that's where the story gets complicated. I grew up in a 2-bedroom rental above my grandparents' garage with just my mom and me. We didn't have much, just each other, and that was enough. I remember the smell of ramen filling the kitchen on chilly nights, and my mom's tired voice reading me bedtime stories. She wasn't perfect, but she tried. I believed in that. Then everything changed when Steve came into the picture. He was distant, polite, and didn't seem to notice me at first. But over time, his presence shifted everything. Our dinners went quiet. My mom stopped asking about my day and started focusing on him, his job, his stories. Gradually, I became invisible in my own home. One afternoon, I came home from a meeting, still wearing my blazer, ready to wind down. I wasn't expecting company, but then I heard a knock, one that wasn't rushed, but firm, like they knew they were entitled to be there. When I peered through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was my mother, Evelyn, and standing behind her was Steve, the man who had changed everything. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. I opened the door, and they didn't wait for an invitation. They just walked in like they belonged. My mom flashed an uncomfortable smile, and Steve barely acknowledged me as he moved past me into the apartment. I was stunned. I didn't even know what to say, so I stood there in silence as they made themselves at home. I closed the door behind them slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. Steve didn't waste any time. He cut right to the point. "We heard about your promotion. Things are looking good for you now." He paused, waiting for me to react. I nodded, bracing myself. I could feel the tension rising like a storm about to break. Then Evelyn jumped in, her voice light, like we hadn't spent years apart. "The twins are starting college soon, and things are a little tight. We were hoping you could help us out." Help out? After all this time? I blinked. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. My mother and stepfather, the same people who had discarded me when I was 16, now expected me to fund their new children's future. The disbelief hit first, followed quickly by a cold wave of clarity. This wasn't about reconciliation or an apology. This was about money, and they were here because, finally, I was worth something to them. I wasn't always invisible to my mom. Before Steve came along, it was just the two of us. We didn't have much, but we had each other. My mom worked tirelessly as a physical therapy assistant while finishing school, and my grandparents helped raise me during those years when my mom could barely stay awake after long days. Those nights when she read me stories with the smell of ramen in the air are memories I'll never forget. She wasn't perfect, but she made me feel loved. When Steve entered our lives, it wasn't an immediate disaster. At first, he didn't say much, and neither did I. I didn't expect anything from him. But slowly, subtly, things started to shift. Dinner conversations used to be lively. My mom would ask about my school, we'd laugh over silly things, and I'd help set the table. But soon, the focus shifted. It was about Steve's day, his work, his thoughts. If I spoke, my words seemed to fade into the background. The shift was more than just his presence. It was the way my mom began to look at me, like I was no longer important. I started disappearing in their world. And when she got pregnant with the twins, I thought maybe this would bring us closer, but I was wrong. As her belly grew, so did the space between us. I had visions of being the cool older sister, helping with diapers, teaching them how to read. But none of that happened. My mom's attention was entirely consumed by the twins, and I started to fade further and further out of the picture. I remember the day she forgot my 13th birthday. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't hurt. But that night, I cried in the darkness of my room, feeling more alone than I ever had before. Even Steve, who didn't seem to hate me, just didn't see me. And once the twins were born, my place in the family was gone. The day my mom told me to leave, it wasn't a big dramatic scene. There was no yelling, no slamming doors. It was a quiet conversation just after dinner, with Steve doing most of the talking. My mom sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. "Rachel," Steve said in that flat, emotionless tone that felt like a punch to the gut. "Things have gotten tight financially. The twins need more space. We've tried our best, but we have to prioritize." I felt the word prioritize choke me. He wasn't talking about family, he was talking about logistics. And then came the blow. "It's probably best if you move out. Maybe stay with your grandparents until you get on your feet." I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just sat there, stunned, waiting for my mom to say anything at all. But she didn't. She just nodded, agreeing with Steve's decision. No hesitation, no protest. My mother, the woman who had once been my world, just let me go. I packed up my room that night, just a few clothes, my journal, and a photo of me and my grandmother from when I was younger. The room that had once felt like home didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't even say goodbye. I walked to my grandparents' house that night, the cold wind biting at my skin. My grandmother pulled me into a hug when she opened the door, holding me so tightly I almost couldn't breathe. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. I moved into my grandparents' house that night, with no plan and a heart heavy with the weight of abandonment. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't need to. They offered me the spare room, a warm meal, and most importantly, safety. My grandmother, with her kind eyes, didn't need to say much. She just held me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. But love, as comforting as it was, wasn't enough to pay for clothes, school supplies, or bus fare. My grandparents were retired, living on a fixed income, and I knew they couldn't carry me forever. So I did what I had to do. I got a job at a local cafe, working evenings and weekends. It wasn't glamorous, refilling coffee cups, wiping down tables, counting crumpled dollar bills for tips. But it was something. It kept me going. Every morning I went to school. I acted like everything was fine. I didn't tell my teachers or friends what was going on. I didn't want anyone's pity. I wanted to survive. I needed to survive. I hoped deep down that my mom would call, that she would realize she made a mistake. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and there was nothing. No phone call, no apology. No sign that she even noticed I was gone. And that's when I realized something that cut deeper than any rejection. She hadn't just asked me to leave. She had chosen a life without me, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The hardest part of this new life came when college applications opened. It was a chance, a chance to escape, to prove I could build something better, to show the world what I was capable of. I stayed up late, hunched over my grandmother's old laptop, filling out forms, rewriting essays, and watching the world around me fade into a blur of exhaustion. When the acceptance letters started to arrive, I was overwhelmed. I wasn't expecting to get in anywhere, but here I was with options. For the first time in years, someone had noticed me. Someone believed in me. But there was a catch: tuition. Even with scholarships, I couldn't afford it on my own. I needed a co-signer for the federal loans, and that meant reaching out to the one person I had hoped would never hear from me again: my mom. I stared at my phone for hours, drafting and deleting the message. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to need her, but I had no choice. I finally sent a simple message. "Hi, Mom. I've been accepted into several schools and I'm trying to secure financial aid. Would you be willing to co-sign a loan?" The reply came the next morning, brief and cold. "Sorry, we're saving for the twins. We can't help. Hope you understand." No congratulations, no questions, just a refusal. It wasn't the answer I expected, but it was the one I feared most. I felt the weight of her rejection, but then something incredible happened. My Aunt Claire, who had always been a quiet supporter, stepped in. She didn't ask questions or lecture me on my grades. She didn't care about my GPA or if I was worthy. She just believed in me, simply because she knew I had potential. When I told her what had happened with my mom, Claire looked me in the eye and said, "You're not going to miss out on your future because some people forgot how to be family. I'll co-sign the loan." Her belief in me was a lifeline. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that someone saw me, truly saw me, and believed I was worth something. That belief sparked something deep within me, a fire that pushed me to work harder, to hustle even more, to build the future I wanted without looking back. From that point on, I worked like my life depended on it, because in many ways it did. I balanced classes during the day with web design gigs at night. I taught myself how to code from YouTube tutorials, stayed up until the early hours of the morning, surviving on microwave noodles and discount coffee. It wasn't easy, but I was doing it. I was moving forward. Every day felt like a battle, but each small victory made the struggle worth it. And as I worked, I began to see the cracks in the old story. The story where I was invisible, the one where my family had cast me aside. It wasn't true anymore. I was building something bigger than that now, something just for me. Over the years, my life started to take shape in ways I hadn't even imagined. I graduated with a degree, started paying off my student loans, and even landed a leadership role at a logistics firm. But throughout all of this, my family stayed silent. I saw glimpses of their life on social media, the twins at science fairs, matching family outfits at Disneyland, but I was never mentioned. Not once, not a tag, not a comment. It felt like I had never existed to them. Eventually, I blocked my mom on social media. It wasn't out of anger, it was out of self-preservation. I couldn't keep watching the life I wasn't a part of anymore. And then one day, I received a message. It wasn't from my mom. It wasn't from Steve. It was from Aunt Claire, letting me know that someone had told my mom about my success. The news had gotten out, and 3 days later, they showed up at my door. The knock at my door wasn't one I ever expected to hear again. After 15 years, I found myself face to face with the people who had tossed me aside. There they were, standing on my doorstep, as if they had every right to be there. My mother, smiling like we hadn't spent more than a decade in silence, and Steve standing behind her, arms crossed like he was ready for business. "Rachel," my mother said, her voice as smooth and casual as if we'd just spoken last week. "We heard about your new role. That's wonderful." I didn't respond immediately. I just raised an eyebrow. It was surreal. This moment that felt like a ghost, something from the past trying to return and pick up where it left off. But things had changed. I had changed. Steve cut in, matter of fact, as usual. "The twins are starting college this fall. We've hit a financial snag. Figured you could help out." His tone wasn't hopeful, it was expectant. I felt my chest tighten. Help out? After all these years of silence, abandonment, and erasure, now they expected me to step in? The room was thick with the weight of their words. It wasn't even a question. It wasn't a plea. They assumed that because I was successful now, I owed them something. And for a moment, I had to stop and breathe. I had to remind myself who I was now, who I had become. I looked at them, taking in the sheer audacity of it all. "Why would you think I'd help you?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest. Steve scoffed, clearly irritated. "Because you can afford it. You don't have kids, you're single, you've got more than enough." My mom added, almost pleading, "Don't be dramatic. We're just asking for help. It's what family does." But I couldn't help but feel that this wasn't about family. Not anymore. It was about them trying to cash in on a bond they had broken long ago. And that wasn't how this worked anymore. I stood taller, feeling my own strength. "You didn't help me when I needed it most. You didn't sign that loan. You didn't call. You didn't care. I made it without you. And now you think I owe you for being absent?" The words were quiet but solid, ringing in the air. For once, I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel the need to justify myself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. And I was done whispering my truth. They left without another word. The door closed behind them with no fanfare, no sense of victory. It was just silence. But it was a different kind of silence than I had known before. This one wasn't filled with doubt, confusion, or longing. It was pure, undeniable. It was peace. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself. This time, when I replayed the conversation in my head, it wasn't with the familiar guilt and regret. It was with clarity. I had said what needed to be said. And for the first time, I felt free. The next morning, I sat down and wrote them an email. It was brief, polite, but final. "I wish you well, but I am not in a position, emotionally or otherwise, to support your request. Please do not contact me again." That was it. There were no long-winded explanations, no begging for closure. I didn't need it anymore. I had said my piece, and now I was ready to move forward. As the years went by, I redirected my energy. I began contributing to a scholarship fund at my old community college, specifically for first-generation students who didn't have the luxury of family support. It wasn't just about the money. It was about showing them that someone believed in them. Someone knew what it was like to be overlooked. Each donation came with a note, a message for those who might feel like they didn't belong, for the ones who felt invisible, like I had once felt. And every time I wrote one of those notes, I thought about the person I used to be, the young girl who thought no one cared, and I realized that I was doing something I never got. I was offering hope. And through all of this, my bond with Aunt Claire grew stronger. I called her every Sunday. I brought her flowers for no reason other than to remind her that she mattered to me. She had saved me in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. And I was determined to never forget that. By the time I turned 30, my life was unrecognizable to the one I had once known. I had paid off my student loans, moved into a modest but beautiful apartment in a quiet part of Minneapolis, and finally found a place where I felt at peace. My career flourished, and I had built a circle of people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about achieving success. It was about reclaiming my voice and never letting anyone take that away from me again. The woman I became had nothing to do with the woman who had abandoned me. She didn't define me anymore. And when people ask if I regret cutting ties with my family, the answer is always the same. No, I don't carry guilt for enforcing my boundaries. I carry peace, because the truth is, not everyone who gives you life knows how to love you. And not everyone who calls you family deserves a place in your future. I learned that love doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it comes from an aunt who co-signs your dreams, from a grandmother who never stops believing in you, or from a stranger who gives you the confidence to keep moving forward. I built my life from the pieces they left behind, and I built it well. Every day, I wake up proud, not because it was easy, but because it was mine to claim. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like you weren't enough, like someone you loved made you feel disposable, remember this: you are not too much, you are not hard to love, you are not broken beyond repair. And most importantly, you are allowed to walk away from what hurts you, because sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do is choose peace over permission. And that's exactly what I did.